Navarrete is a unique fighter for many reasons. His huge volume of punching, his creative punching angles, and of course, his heavy hands. But what truly sets him apart as a world-class fighter is his ability to control the pace of the fight, while keeping his opponents on their toes. To the naked eye, it just seems like a mess of punches and awkward movements. But in reality, Navarrete is a fighter that understands how to misdirect his opponents, making his punches harder to defend. This ability to dictate the pace allows him to throw his combinations at unexpected moments, and with enough volume that overwhelms his opponents. Understanding how to control the pace of the fight is important to dominate your opponents. And understanding how to maintain this control is crucial to keep your momentum through the fight. This ability to keep your opponents on their toes is used by many fighters like Usyk, who is always dictating and pushing the pacing on his fights. So, how does Navarrete set the pace of the fight? And how does he keep the control of that pacing, despite his opponent's best efforts to fight back? In the first part of this video, we will look at the skills that Navarrete uses from the beginning of the fight to establish his pace. Then, on the second part of the video, we will analyze how he maintains control by disrupting Valdez's rhythm, neutralizing one of the best counter-punchers in his weight class. By the end of this video, you will know how to set and control the pace of your fights and sparring. But first, to understand how Navarrete sets the pace of the fight, we must first understand what is the pacing of the fight. In simple terms, it is how proactive the fighters are. Being proactive means that a fighter is constantly looking to set up their next attack, with feints, with punches, and with movement. As a quick example, when both fighters are waiting for each other, standing on the same spot, this is what we usually call a slow-paced fight. Since both fighters' mindset is a reactive one, they are just waiting for his opponent to make the first move. On the other hand, when both fighters are feinting, punching, and moving, we usually refer to this as a fast-paced fight. Because both fighters are being proactive, they are constantly setting up new attacks and look to control the fight. This doesn't mean that the fighter has to be reckless or take unnecessary damage to push the pace of the fight. Canelo vs. Plant is an example of a high-paced fight that showed both fighters being proactive. Both fighters stayed defensively responsible while constantly setting up their next attack. The key words here are proactive and reactive. If you want to set the pace of the fight, you generally want to increase the pace of the fight. And the only way to do this is by being proactive. This is precisely what Navarrete does. He's constantly bombarding his opponents with information. He is proactively setting up his next attack. Another advantage of being proactive is that it keeps your opponent on a defensive state. And keeping your opponents on a defensive state allows you to build your momentum. Think about it. If your opponent is constantly reacting to your movements, trying to anticipate your next attack, they have little time to think and set up their own attacks. This inability to build momentum can be exemplified by Valdez in his fight against Navarrete. He is being reactive, forced to react to Navarrete's moves. Valdez has a harder time to set up his own attacks, since he is too busy trying to anticipate Navarrete's attacks. To put it simply, if I want to set the pace of the fight, I must be proactive, setting up my next move, keeping my opponent on their toes. But successfully setting up the pace requires more than just being active. Navarrete's true genius comes from his ability to set the pace of the fight while keeping his attacks unpredictable. If he was being proactive, using the same patterns over and over, his opponents would eventually adjust and counter. So, on top of being proactive, the second thing that Navarrete does is to constantly change the patterns of his feints and attacks. Staying unpredictable makes it hard for Valdez to defend and counter Navarrete's punches. Navarrete achieves this with three skills that build on top of each other. The first skill is Navarrete's change of punching patterns. It can be done by changing the angle of the punch or by increasing or decreasing the number of punches from one combo to the other. Most of the time, Navarrete puts these two concepts together. Usually, Navarrete starts the fight with single jabs and some feints. Here we have one punching angle, which is a straight punch, and only one punch at a time. This creates a pattern that Navarrete will break. But very quickly, he can go from single shots to doubles, and from straights to hooks and uppercuts. In this example, we see that after the break, Navarrete starts throwing single punches. Once he sets that pattern, he suddenly switches gears and throws three punches. This puts Valdez on his toes. With a feint, Navarrete gets Valdez to defend too early and lands a hook that Valdez didn't saw coming. Navarrete's method is simple. Start with single punches. Once your opponent gets used to that, throw follow-up punches. Once your opponent is expecting volume, go back to single shots. With this tool, Navarrete keeps Valdez on his toes by constantly making him guess the amount of punches coming his way. On top of this, Navarrete also punches you from all angles, making it hard to predict where the punch is going to land, adding to the pressure. But Navarrete can add even more dimensions to his unpredictability. Navarrete also throws off his opponents with feints in between his combinations. This makes his opponents defend too early, leaving themselves vulnerable for the real punch. To watch Navarrete's feints in his combinations, we're going to watch some clips of his first fight with Valdez. I find that this fight has the best examples. In this example, Navarrete starts throwing singles as we saw before. Suddenly, he throws a jab and fakes a right hand. Valdez can sense the increment of intensity, so he tries to adjust and drives back, leaving his base. Navarrete takes advantage of this by lunging with an upper. Notice how Valdez anticipates a punch with the right. But Navarrete, staying unpredictable, doubles down with his left arm. And then he throws a right hook. In this example, Navarrete confused Valdez by both adding punches to his combinations and by feinting in between his punches. In this example, we see how Navarrete creates a pattern, throwing a jab and then following up with his signature left uppercut. Navarrete throws a few punches, and then he repeats the setup. Navarrete jabs and fakes the uppercut, getting Valdez off position, and now Navarrete commits to a left hook and a right hand. In this example, Navarrete first landed a combination successfully, and then he threw the same combination but changed the pattern to throw off Valdez. In this third example, Navarrete throws a 1-2. Then he throws a 1 and fakes the 2, and switches for an uppercut, almost hitting Valdez as he leaned forward. It is important to remember that all these punches have purpose. Navarrete first sets up a pattern that Valdez can expect, and then he breaks that pattern to surprise him. But Navarrete can add even one more layer to his unpredictability. He can also change when he's going to punch. The third skill that Navarrete uses is his attacks on the reset. While most fighters use the reset to relax after an exchange, Navarrete uses his long reach to attack when his opponents start to relax. This adds another layer of pressure, since now they have to worry about Navarrete coming at them at any moment. In this example, we have Navarrete attempting an attack, and Valdez smothers him. That was a great move. But when both fighters reset, notice how Navarrete is lunging in right away, while Valdez is not fully prepared for it. In this example, we have Navarrete initiating an attack. Valdez defends and Navarrete is now in a southpaw stance. Usually a fighter who breaks his stance would step back and reset before they attack again. But Navarrete attacked again from the southpaw stance. After that exchange, we have Valdez trying to move away, but Navarrete initiates yet another attack. Now, we have Valdez as the one initiating the attack. Navarrete steps back. Notice how both fighters are a bit relaxed, as they are out of range. But in a second, Navarrete switches from relaxing to full combination. After Navarrete misses this hook, he takes a small step back, and before Valdez can fully recover, Navarrete attacks again. Notice how Valdez manages to get a good distance. That usually would mean that he is safe, but Navarrete keeps lunging in. Remember that these constant attacks are effective because Navarrete is not giving Valdez a moment to reset and recover. He is constantly catching up to Navarrete's new attack, and he is unable to think. As you can see, Navarrete is overwhelming not only because of his high activity, but also because of his unpredictability. He can come at you with any punch, any number of punches at any time. This is why his fights seem messy. But in reality, Navarrete is a methodical fighter that creates this chaos on purpose to overwhelm his opponents. So, how can we apply these concepts into our fights? While Navarrete's techniques like punching on a southpaw stance or lunging with uppercuts are quite rare, the concepts that allow Navarrete to set the pace of the fight can be seen used by other fighters known to control the pacing of their fights, like Usyk and Golovkin. The first thing all these fighters do is to establish their distance to negate their opponent's attacks, because if we negate our opponent's attacks, we stop them from setting the pace of the fight. Notice how Usyk is constantly adjusting his distance to make sure that Gassiev is never in position to attack. The second step is to use your jab and setups to set the pace of the fight and start getting your opponent on their toes. Here we can see Usyk constantly showing his jab and feinting. Most of these punches don't even have power behind them. Instead, all this work is designed to confuse and overwhelm, to keep Gassiev on his toes. And of course, as the fight progresses, then Usyk starts to sit on his punches and pick moments to throw full combinations. Now that he has Gassiev under his control, it is safer to sit on his punches and throw bigger combinations. Notice that Usyk stays defensively responsible and is always ready to defend Gassiev's attempts to recover the control of the fight. And as soon as he can, he makes sure to punch back to discourage him. How to maintain control of the pace of the fight while your opponent is trying to fight back is what we will see on the second part of this video. But before we get there, let's watch how Triple G sets the pace of his fights. Golovkin's approach to setting the pace is different from Usyk and Navarrete because he does not have their punching output. But as you can see from the beginning of the fight, Triple G makes sure to feint and move to create the sense of danger from the beginning. And of course, the first step is to establish his distance to neutralize his opponent's attacks. Notice how he changed levels, leans in. All this shows that Golovkin is being proactive and keeps his opponent from relaxing. On the second step, Golovkin is using feints and single shots to increase the pace of the fight. But the heavy lifting is done by Golovkin's movement, specifically how he cuts the ring. As you can see, even though the tools are different, the concept is the same. Stay proactive and keep your opponents on their toes. And finally, as his opponent starts to break down, Golovkin starts to let his hands go with heavier shots and longer combinations, without forgetting to stay defensively responsible. While keeping this pressure, Golovkin found a good opportunity to land a clean shot to the body, and this finishes the fight. Now that you know how to set the pace of the fight, the next question is, how can we keep control when your opponent is fighting back. Navarrete is not only prepared to handle his opponents when they are fighting back, he also punishes them for even trying. When it comes to keeping the control of the pacing of the fight, Navarrete uses 3 skills. The first skill is his control of the distance. The second are his counters from odd angles. And the third one can just be described as punishing them from even trying. Let's first analyze his control of the distance. Even though it's unorthodox, Navarrete is excellent at controlling the distance. He's the embodiment of being too far to be hit or too close to be hit effectively. As we know, distance is the first line of defense, and Navarrete uses this resource really well. He just makes it really hard for his opponents to be at the right distance to punch. Notice how quickly Navarrete discourages Valdez's attack. Valdez steps in, Navarrete smothers, there is a short break, and Navarrete goes back to applying pressure. Here is another example. Valdez initiates an attack. Navarrete quickly pulls, ducks, and notice how quickly he just leaves Valdez's punching range. It takes him 1 second to recover his base, and then he's ready to counter, taking away Valdez's momentum. As you can see, controlling the distance is a huge aspect of Navarrete's defense. It doesn't matter if his movements are a little bit awkward. As long as Navarrete keeps you out of your punching range, you won't be able to land a shot to hurt him. But this control of the distance is not the only thing stopping Valdez from getting control of the pacing of the fight. The second skill that Navarrete uses are his counters from odd angles. That is, even if Valdez sets up a perfect counter from the right angle, Navarrete always finds a way to land a counter that can hurt him. In this other example, Valdez initiates an attack, and Navarrete ends up off his base. Instead of a reset, Navarrete just throws a punch from an odd position. He tries to continue his attack, but Valdez drives out of punching range, and then he steps in to smother Navarrete. Somehow, Navarrete throws a right hook as he's negating the smother. Valdez keeps pushing forward, and Navarrete throws a left hook, again from an odd position, moving backwards. These counters from odd positions makes it really dangerous to attack Navarrete. While it is usually enough to use a setup to create openings and land your shots, with Navarrete, even if you create a clean opportunity to attack, you never know if you're going to end up being countered by him. This is why, when we see Valdez having a bit of success, he seems to abandon the attack out of the blue. And this discouragement allows Navarrete to keep control over the pacing of the fight. The third skill that Navarrete uses to keep control of the fight can only be described as punishing them from even trying. When Valdez attacks Navarrete, Navarrete retaliates, increasing the intensity back. He uses his huge gas tank to bombard him with punches, making it really hard for Valdez to recover. Let's watch this example again. We have Valdez initiating an attack, and after the reset, he tries another attack. Navarrete counters with 3 punches. Before Valdez can fully recover and reset, Navarrete launches another attack, this time with 6 punches. Valdez tries to smother, but Navarrete steps back and keeps throwing punches. This attack only ends when Valdez manages to smother Navarrete. This aggressive retaliation can also be seen on the knockdown of the 4th round, where we have Valdez initiating an attack. Navarrete punches with Valdez, but in this case, Valdez continues the attack, pushing Navarrete. So Navarrete at this point increases the intensity and starts to feint and punch Valdez, and eventually he gets the knockdown. As you can see, Navarrete simply kept exchanging until Valdez could not keep up, resulting on the knockdown. Now, I have a huge disclaimer to share about Navarrete's last skill. As you noticed, Navarrete tends to walk into some punches due to his eagerness to get back to his opponents. While successful boxing requires you to take controlled risks, forcing exchanges like Navarrete does will get you walking into shots more often than not. It is important to understand the risk behind this tactic. Most of the time, it's just enough to leave the exchange and effectively reset your opponent before you initiate your next attack. At the end of the day, to maintain the control of the fight, controlling the distance goes a long way and is a safer approach. And, as shown before, it is a tactic that all dominating fighters use. From Usyk, negating exchanges by driving back, to Triple G, maintaining a distance where his opponent's punches are not effective. If now you want to learn how to defeat a pressure fighter, click on this video, where I break down the techniques that Valenzuela used to defeat Pitbull. Remember to subscribe to the channel and leave me a comment on any other topics you would like me to cover. Thanks for watching.